You think you know what crime is. You see it on the news, you read it in the papers. Theft, assault, murder. They are tears in the fabric of society, for sure. But the fabric itself, the material of reality, you assume that's solid. You assume the rules of the world, that a day has 24 hours, that your memories are your own, that the words you speak belong to you. You assume those things are absolute. I'm here to tell you they're not. I'm here to tell you there are people who can tear that fabric, and I know because for the last 7 years, I've been their jailer. My name is Elias Thorne, and I work as a correctional officer at a maximum security federal prison you've never heard of for crimes you wouldn't believe. We don't just keep the public safe from criminals, we keep reality safe from itself. 7 years ago, my life was a mess. That's probably the most normal sentence you'll hear from me for a while, so enjoy it. My dad's medical bills had wiped out my parents' savings and then some. I was working 2 dead-end jobs, one stocking shelves at a grocery store overnight, the other washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner. I was swimming in debt, watching my mom grow older and more worried with every passing day. I wasn't living, I was just servicing debt. My own dreams, my own life, had been put on hold indefinitely. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own story. I was scrolling through a government job board at 3 in the morning, fueled by stale coffee and desperation, when I saw the listing. Detention and Rehabilitation Specialist. It was for a federal facility in a remote, unspecified location in the Nevada desert. The pay was astronomical. It was the kind of salary that could solve all my problems in a single year. The kind of money that could let my mom finally retire, that could let me breathe again. The requirements were strange. No college degree necessary. A rigorous psychological evaluation was mandatory. And the most unusual part? A 5-year, non-negotiable contract. For the first 5 years, you didn't leave the facility grounds at all. It was more like joining a monastery or a deep space mission than taking a prison job. To a man drowning, it didn't sound like a prison. It sounded like a life raft. I applied, not expecting to hear back. A week later, I got an email. It was a plane ticket to a private airfield outside Las Vegas and instructions for the next stage. No interview over the phone, just a summons. I told my mom I was taking a high-paying job on an oil rig, a lie that felt flimsy even as I said it. She cried, but she knew how desperate I was. We both knew. The interview process was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't in an office building. They drove me and a handful of other desperate-looking souls out into the desert in a black windowless van. We arrived at a single, featureless concrete building sticking out of the flat, sun-baked earth. Inside, it was cold, sterile, and silent. There were no panels of smiling employees on the walls, no motivational posters. Just white walls, gray floors, and the low hum of industrial air conditioning. The interview itself wasn't a conversation, it was an examination. A team of stern-faced psychologists in sharp suits put me through a battery of tests. They didn't ask me about my strengths or weaknesses. They showed me ink blots, pictures of impossible objects, played audio tones that made my teeth ache. They asked me questions that felt like traps for my sanity. Have you ever felt a day was shorter or longer than it should be? Do you believe your memories are an accurate and complete recording of your past? If you saw something you knew was impossible, would you report it or rationalize it? I answered as honestly as I could. I figured I had nothing to lose. I talked about the pressure, the debt, the feeling of being trapped. I told them I wasn't looking for a career, just a solution. I needed a rock to stand on, and I didn't care if that rock was in the middle of nowhere. I must have given them the answers they wanted. A week after I returned home, a thick manila envelope arrived. It contained a contract, a non-disclosure agreement that promised penalties so severe they sounded almost medieval, and a start date. I signed everything. I felt a profound sense of relief mixed with a cold, sharp sliver of dread. I was trading my freedom for my family's. It felt like a fair trade. The facility has a name on the few declassified documents that mention it, the U.S. Special Containment Unit Number 7, or the Panopticon. But the staff just calls it the library, or sometimes the asylum. It doesn't look like a prison from the outside. There are no barbed wire fences, no guard towers, just a sprawling single-story complex of brushed concrete and smoked glass that shimmers in the desert heat like a mirage. It sinks deeper into the earth than it rises above it. Most of the facility is underground, a multi-level labyrinth of quiet white corridors. My first day, I was assigned a mentor, a senior officer named Miller. He was a tall, stoic man with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold a permanent weariness. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a friendly handshake. He just handed me my uniform and said, "Rule number 1, believe what you see, not what you think you should see. Rule number 2, what you see is classified above your pay grade. Don't ask questions you don't need the answers to. Rule number 3, never, ever accept anything an inmate tries to give you. Not an object, not a word, not a thought. Is that clear?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Crystal," I managed to say. "Good," he grunted. "Let's take a walk." The silence was the first thing that truly unnerved me. In a normal prison, there's noise, shouting, clanging doors, TVs blaring. The Panopticon was as quiet as a tomb. The floors were made of some kind of sound-dampening composite. The doors hissed open and shut with the barest whisper of compressed air. We walked through corridors that felt more like a hospital or a laboratory than a cell block. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone, like the air after a thunderstorm. "Where are the inmates?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive quiet. Miller glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "They're here. You just don't hear them unless they want you to." He led me to an observation deck overlooking what they called a containment wing. It was a circular chamber with a ring of cells on the outer wall. But the cells weren't barred cages. Each was a self-contained room with a wall of thick, armored glass facing the central observation hub. Inside each cell was a single person in a simple gray jumpsuit. They weren't pacing or yelling, they were just existing. One was sitting on his bed staring at a blank wall. Another was standing perfectly still in the center of her room. Another was slowly tracing patterns on the floor with his finger. "This is Wing Gamma," Miller said, his voice low. "Low-risk offenders. We'll start you here." "What did they do?" I asked, looking at the seemingly catatonic man in the nearest cell. He looked like a normal middle-aged guy, the kind of man you'd see mowing his lawn on a Saturday. Miller consulted a tablet he was holding. "Inmate 417, real name classified. His designation is chronomapper. His crime was the attempted grand larceny of a weekday." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. He didn't even blink. I'm sorry," I said. "The what?" "He developed a method to unmoor a specific day from the linear progression of the week," Miller said, in the same flat tone he might use to describe a carjacking. "He didn't want to skip it or repeat it. He wanted to remove it, steal it. He was building a device in his garage that would have made every calendar in the world jump from Monday to Wednesday. He believed Tuesday was an inefficient day and that humanity would be better off without it. We caught him just before he activated the device. The potential damage to temporal continuity was significant. I felt a wave of dizziness. This had to be a joke, some kind of elaborate hazing for the new guy. "You're kidding me?" Miller turned his head slowly to look at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was pity. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "look at my face. Do I look like I'm kidding? You're not in a normal prison, guarding normal criminals. You are in a facility designed to contain individuals whose actions threaten the baseline stability of reality itself. The men and women in these cells are not murderers or thieves in the conventional sense. They are conceptual terrorists, reality hackers. Their minds don't work like yours or mine. They see the source code of the world and they try to rewrite it. He pointed to another cell where a young woman was meticulously braiding her own hair. Inmate 525, mnemonic thief. She could isolate and remove specific memories from other people. Not just make them forget, she could pluck the memory out of their head like a weed, leaving a perfectly seamless whole. She didn't do it for power or money. She did it because she was a minimalist. She thought people were cluttered with too many unnecessary memories, and she was just tidying up. She tidied up her entire hometown's memory of the mayor before we apprehended her. A town of 5,000 people just woke up one day with no idea who was running their city. I leaned against the glass of the observation deck, my legs feeling weak. The air conditioning hummed. The inmates sat in their silent rooms. This wasn't a job. It was a madhouse, and I was trapped in it, thousands of miles from everything I knew and understood. The first few months were a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. Every morning, I would wake up in my small, featureless apartment in the staff quarters, a place as sterile as the prison itself. I'd put on my uniform, walk the silent white corridors, and spend 8 hours watching men and women who had committed crimes against the laws of physics and logic. Then I'd return to my apartment, eat a meal prepared in the communal cafeteria, and watch approved, bland television shows on the closed-circuit network. I'd call my mom once a week on a monitored satellite phone, telling her the oil rig was fine, the work was hard but steady, and yes, I was eating my vegetables. Every word of that normal conversation felt like a lie. The real lie wasn't the oil rig. It was the pretense that a normal world even existed anymore. My world was now a place where a man designated the acoustic alchemist was in solitary confinement because he'd figured out how to turn the sound of laughter into solid, razor-sharp glass. His apartment had been a beautiful, terrifying museum of frozen joy. We had to wear special gear to apprehend him, lest a chuckle from one of the officers become a weapon. My world was a place where a woman known as the syllable stealer sat in her cell humming to herself. Her crime was subtle, insidious. She could choose a syllable, any syllable, like re or mo or tone, and erase it from the minds and mouths of an entire community. In her town, she'd stolen the syllable L. People couldn't say hello or yellow or elevator. They couldn't ring a bell. Their language, their ability to communicate began to fracture and break down. Society in that small town didn't collapse with a bang. It just frayed. It came apart at the seams because a fundamental building block of their speech was gone. They descended into paranoia and violence, all because one woman thought it would be interesting. I tried to keep my head down. I did my job. I followed Miller's rules. I watched. I logged their behavior. I delivered their nutrient paste, a tasteless, nutritionally complete goop that ensured they couldn't get any kind of sensory pleasure from food. Pleasure, we were taught, could be a catalyst for their abilities. Strong emotions were like fuel, so everything in the panopticon was designed to be neutral. The light was a flat, unvarying white. The temperature never changed. The silence was constant. We were attempting to bore reality benders into submission. But you can't fully suppress human emotion, not mine anyway. I was terrified, not of the inmates physically, most were docile, but of the concepts they represented. The idea that reality was so fragile, so flimsy, that a single focused thought could break it. I started having nightmares, not about monsters, but about inconsistencies. I'd dream I was back home, but the color blue had been stolen, and the sky was a fleshy, pulsating gray. I'd dream I was talking to my mom, but I couldn't remember her name, the memory plucked clean from my head. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in the sterile silence of my room, and have to spend 5 minutes just staring at my hands, reminding myself of who I was and where I was. Elias Thorne, Officer, U.S. Special Containment Unit Number 7. I was real. This was real. The human touch in that place was almost non-existent, but it found its way through the cracks. Miller, for all his stoicism, became a strange sort of anchor for me. He never offered comfort, but he offered consistency. We'd share a coffee in the staff lounge, the silence between us more companionable than awkward. One day, I finally worked up the courage to ask him something that had been eating at me. "Miller," I began, stirring my coffee, "how do they do it? Is it magic or science we don't understand?" He took a long sip before answering, his eyes on the blank wall opposite us. "Does it matter?" he asked. "If a man points a gun at you, do you ask him about the principles of combustion and metallurgy, or do you just see the threat? We're not scientists here, Thorne. We're janitors. These people, they spill things. They track mud from some other, darker reality into our own. Our job is just to mop it up and keep the floor clean." "But where do they come from?" I pressed. "They can't all just be born this way, can they?" He finally looked at me, and his weary eyes held a deep, profound sadness. "Some are, born with a loose connection to the consensus reality. Others, they find it. They stumble upon a book they shouldn't have read, listen to a song broadcast from a dead star, solve an equation that should have remained unsolved. They pry open a door in their mind and find something staring back. Sometimes what stares back takes them over. Sometimes it just gives them ideas." He stood up, his coffee finished. "Thinking about it too much is a risk in this job. It's like staring at the sun. You'll burn your damn eyes out. Just focus on your rounds." That conversation didn't calm my nerves. It did the opposite. It gave my fear a shape. The idea that this wasn't just random madness, but that there was a source, a place, a thing that was leaking these concepts into our world. The incident that changed everything for me, that broke through my carefully constructed wall of professional detachment, happened about a year into my contract. It involved inmate 730. His designation was the perspective skewer. He was a former architect who had the ability to force his own spatial perspective onto others. It sounds harmless, but it wasn't. Imagine standing at the end of a long hallway, and suddenly your brain is forced to see it from the perspective of a man standing at the other end, looking back at you. The sensory conflict, the vertigo, the sheer neurological violence of being in one place but seeing from another was enough to drive a person insane. He had used it on the board of directors that had fired him, leaving them as babbling catatonic messes, unable to reconcile their bodies with their minds. He was usually calm, spending his days building intricate structures out of his nutrient paste. But on this day, he was agitated. He was pacing, muttering to himself. I was on duty in the observation hub with Miller. "He's getting active," I noted, my voice tight. "Should we call the psych team?" "Just watch him," Miller said, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Suddenly, number 730 stopped pacing. He turned and stared directly at the observation glass. He stared directly at me. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. And then he raised his hand. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like the world breaking. In one instant, my perspective snapped. I was still standing in the observation hub, but my eyes were inside the cell with him, looking back at myself. I saw my own body, standing there, a look of slack-jawed horror on my face. I could feel the cool metal of the railing under my hands, but I could see my hands hang limp at my sides, a dozen yards away. The hallway behind my own body looked miles long. The room I was in, the cell, felt claustrophobically small. My brain screamed. It was a complete sensory disassociation. I tried to scream for real, but my mouth was over there. I tried to move, but the body I was looking at didn't respond. A tidal wave of nausea and vertigo crashed over me. The world became a twisted, Escher-like nightmare. I was here and there, me and him. The distinction began to blur. Then I felt a powerful grip on my shoulder. "Thorne, breathe." It was Miller's voice cutting through the chaos. "Anchor yourself. Look at me." I couldn't look at him. He was standing next to the body I was watching. Through sheer force of will, I closed my eyes. the eyes in the cell, and focused on the physical sensations of my real body, the pressure of Miller's hand, the feeling of the floor under my shoes, the frantic beating of my own heart. I focused on the memory of my name. Elias Thorne. My name is Elias Thorne. I am here.
Slowly, painfully, like a film snapping back into focus, my perspective lurched and slammed back into my own head. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, sweat pouring down my face. The world swam, but it was my world again. My eyes, my body. I looked up. Miller was standing over me, his face pale. In the cell, #730 was on the floor, restrained by an automated system that had injected him with a powerful sedative. The smile was gone, replaced by a vacant stare. Miller helped me to my feet. "You held it together," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Most people break." What was that?" I stammered. "He targeted you," Miller said grimly. "That's a breach of protocol, for him and for us." He looked at me, and the pity was back in his eyes. "You can't just be an observer anymore, Thorne. You get it now, don't you? This isn't a zoo. This is a battlefield, and the battlefield is your own mind." From that day on, the fear was different. It was no longer a vague existential dread. It was a sharp, personal, immediate thing. The inmates weren't just concepts anymore. They were threats. The job was no longer about watching. It was about surviving. My 5-year contract felt like a life sentence. The years began to blur, each one marked by increasingly strange and terrifying experiences. I learned to recognize the subtle shifts in the prison's atmosphere that preceded an event. A change in the hum of the ventilation, a flicker in the steady white lights, a sudden drop in temperature. These were the telltale signs that one of the inmates was straining against their containment, that the fabric of our little reality was growing thin in one spot or another. I became adept at mental self-defense. I developed anchors, little rituals to keep myself grounded. I would recite the names of every teacher I ever had, from kindergarten to high school. I would picture the exact layout of my childhood home, room by room, piece by piece of furniture. I would hum the tune of a song my dad used to love, a simple country song that had no place in the sterile silence of the panopticon. These memories, these mundane, normal pieces of my past, became my shield. They were the proof that another world, a real world, existed outside these walls. I got to know the inmates, not as people, but as phenomena. There was #219, the emotional meteorologist. He didn't feel his own emotions. He felt the collective emotional state of a geographic area. He was brought in after he'd caused a freak flash flood in downtown Phoenix because he'd tapped into a sudden massive wave of civic grief following a local sports team's championship loss. He had to be kept in a carefully balanced state of emotional neutrality. His cell monitored by a team of psychologists who would modulate the news and information he received to prevent any emotional weather events. There was #804, the abstract plagiarist. A failed artist, she had developed the ability to steal the fundamental concepts from other people's creative works. She wouldn't copy a painting, she'd steal the melancholy. She wouldn't steal a song, she'd steal its crescendo, leaving the original piece feeling hollow and incomplete. She was surrounded by the ghosts of stolen brilliance, and her containment cell was a dead zone for creativity. No officer guarding her was ever able to have an original thought. We all just thought in cliches and tattered phrases until our shift ended.
My relationship with Miller deepened. We were veterans of a secret war, and that forged a bond that transcended friendship. One night, during a system-wide diagnostic check, much of the facility was on lockdown. We were sitting in the deserted cafeteria, the two of us, under the dim glow of emergency lighting. "Why do you stay, Miller?" I asked, breaking a long silence. "Your contract must have been up years ago." He stared into his cup as if it held the answers to the universe. "Where would I go?" he said, his voice raspy. "Back out there, after everything I've seen? It's like being a deep-sea diver. You spend years in the crushing dark, seeing creatures of the abyss that no one on the surface would ever believe. And then you're supposed to just come back up and go lie on a beach, go to a barbecue, talk about sports?" He shook his head slowly. "I can't. The sky looks too thin now. The ground feels too unstable. This is the only place that makes sense anymore, because it's the only place that admits the world doesn't make sense." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "This place changes you, Thorne. It recalibrates your soul. You're not the same desperate kid who walked in here 5 years ago." He was right. I wasn't. The desperation for money had been burned away by a much more profound kind of fear. The fear of what would happen if this place failed, if we failed. My 5-year contract came and went. I signed another, and another after that. My mom had passed away peacefully in her sleep during my 6th year. I watched her funeral on a grainy satellite feed, alone in my sterile room, a universe away. The news broke something in me, but it also forged something new. My ties to the outside world were fraying. My anchors were becoming memories of memories. The panopticon was becoming my reality. It was in my 7th year that I was given a new assignment, one that was considered both a promotion and a death sentence. I was transferred to Wing Aleph, the Quiet Wing. The Quiet Wing housed a single inmate, Inmate 001. He was the first, the patient zero of conceptual crime. He was the reason the panopticon was built. Even his designation was spoken in whispers. The other inmates were reality hackers, conceptual terrorists. He was something else entirely. They called him the narrator. The security protocols for the Quiet Wing were extreme. It was isolated from the rest of the facility, accessible only through a series of biometric checkpoints and a single vault-like door that was 3 feet thick. The corridor leading to his cell was an anechoic chamber, the walls covered in black foam pyramids that absorbed all sound. The silence in there was so total it was a physical pressure. You could hear your own heartbeat, the wet sound of your eyes blinking, the blood flowing through the vessels in your ears. Miller briefed me himself. We stood before the final vault door, the air thick with tension. "Everything you've faced so far, Thorne," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper, "they're just echoes of him. He doesn't just bend reality, he rewrites it." "What was his crime?" I asked, my own voice swallowed by the sound-dampening walls. "He was a writer," Miller said, "a nobody, a failure. He wrote a novel about a man whose wife leaves him. A week later, his own wife, who he'd been happily married to for 20 years, packed a bag and left. She said the words from his book felt more real than their own memories." My blood ran cold. Coincidence? "That's what we thought," Miller breathed. "Then he wrote a story about a sudden stock market crash. The next day, the Dow dropped 2,000 points. He wrote about a freak snowstorm in Miami in July. The National Weather Service is still trying to explain that one. He doesn't predict the future, Thorne. He dictates it. He has the ability to impose narrative onto reality. If he writes it, if he believes it with enough conviction, the world reconfigures itself to make it true. He is a living, breathing plot device." "So what's to stop him from just writing that he's free?" I asked, horrified. "His power has limits. It requires focus and a medium. Paper, a keyboard, something to externalize the narrative. So we keep him in a room with nothing. Nothing to write with, nothing to write on. But the most important thing," Miller said, grabbing my arm, his grip like iron, "is that his power is amplified when he has an audience, an observer, someone to read the story. That's why the officer in the observation hub is the most important part of his containment.
Your job is not to watch him. Your job is to disbelieve him. You have to be a wall of pure, stubborn, objective reality. You cannot let a single word he says become a story in your head. Do you understand? He will talk to you. He will try to narrate you. You must not listen. My heart hammered in my chest. This was the final exam, the ultimate test. I spent the next few months as the guardian of the narrator. His cell was a perfect white cube. No bed, no toilet, nothing. He floated in the center of the room, held aloft by a gentle, invisible field of force. He was an older man, with wild white hair and eyes that shone with a terrifying, ancient intelligence. He never seemed to sleep. He just floated, watching the observation glass, watching me. For the first month, he didn't speak a word. The silence was a battle of whales. I focused on my anchors, on my mundane memories. I filled my mind with the boring, unstructured, plotless reality of my own life. I was a fortress. Then, one day, he spoke. His voice came through a single speaker in the hub. It was calm, reasonable, and utterly hypnotic. "Elias Thorne," he said, his voice like the turning of a page. "A good, strong name. It tells a story. A boy from a small town, burdened by duty, who sacrifices his own happiness for his family. A noble, if somewhat tragic protagonist." "I'm not listening," I said aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "Oh, but you are," the narrator replied, a faint smile on his lips. "We've been in this story together for weeks. I've been reading your chapters. The grief over your mother, the quiet respect you have for your mentor, Miller, the lingering fear from your encounter with 730. "Shut up," I snarled, gripping the edge of my console. "But the story is getting a little stale, don't you think?" he continued, his voice weaving a hypnotic spell. "All this grim silence, it needs a twist, a little hope. For instance, what if your mother didn't die? What if her illness was all a misunderstanding, a clerical error in the story? What if, right now, she's sitting at home, waiting for your call, perfectly healthy?" For a single horrifying second, I felt it. A powerful wave of hope, so real and so potent it almost brought me to my knees. The memory of the grainy satellite funeral began to feel fuzzy, unsure, like something I'd read, not something I'd lived. "No," I gasped, slamming my fist on the console. "She's gone. I saw it." "Did you?" The narrator's voice was gentle, seductive. "Or did you just read that chapter? The narrative can be changed. The past isn't written in ink. Let me help you, Elias. Let me write you a better story." I was losing. He was getting inside my defenses, turning my own emotions into weapons against me. I squeezed my eyes shut and focused, not on my memories this time. They were too vulnerable, too easy for him to warp. I focused on the cold, hard, objective truth of my present. The hum of the containment field, the pressure of my boots on the floor, the precise, regulated temperature of the air, the boring, plotless facts of my immediate existence.
"There is no story," I said through gritted teeth. "There is only what is." The narrator laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "Brave words, but everything is a story, Elias, even this. And every story needs a climax." That's when the lights went red. A klaxon, a sound I had never heard before in 7 years, began to blare. Not just in the quiet wing, but throughout the entire facility. A voice, mechanical and calm, echoed from the speakers. "Containment field failure imminent. System-wide cascade event initiated." A power surge, a solar flare, a saboteur.
It didn't matter what the cause was. The complex web of technology that kept these beings in check was failing. The one thing that was never supposed to happen was happening. In the cell, the invisible field holding the narrator flickered and died. He drifted gently to the floor, landing on his feet. He stretched like a man waking from a long nap. The light in his eyes was brighter now, burning with power. "And so," he said, his voice booming, no longer needing the speaker, "our final chapter begins." The vault door behind me slammed shut. The observation glass began to glow, the matrix within it failing. He was breaking his containment, but I knew he wasn't going to break out. He didn't need to. He was going to rewrite the prison, rewrite me from the inside. "It doesn't have to be this way, Elias," he said, walking towards the glass, which was now starting to crackle with energy. "I can make you the hero. I can write you a world where you were never trapped here. A world where your father never got sick, where you married your high school sweetheart, where you have 2 beautiful children and a house with a white picket fence." The images flooded my mind, vivid and real. I could smell the cut grass of the lawn. I could hear the laughter of children who had never been born. I felt the warmth of a life I'd never lived. It was the most beautiful, painful thing I had ever experienced. The temptation to just let go, to let him write that reality for me, was overwhelming. It was the ultimate escape. But then another image broke through. Miller's weary, determined face. The catatonic stare of the architect who had been skewed by his own perspective. The hollow, confused eyes of the people in the town where a syllable had been stolen. They were real. Their suffering was real. If I let him win, if I accepted his story, I would be erasing them. I would be sacrificing the real broken world for a perfect fictional one. My life wasn't a story. It was a messy, painful, boring, and sometimes terrifying collection of unscripted moments. And it was mine. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. I stood up and faced the glass, faced him. "You don't get to write my story." The narrator's smile faded. "Then you have chosen to be a tragedy," he said, his voice turning cold. He placed his hand on the glass. It began to dissolve like sugar in water. "Let's start with your anchors, shall we? Let's erase that mentor you admire so much. What was his name? Miller? A boring name. Let's say you never met him. You came to this facility alone. You were mentored by a man named Jones, a cruel man who framed you for a containment breach. You've been living in disgrace ever since." I felt the memory of Miller's face begin to slip, replaced by the sneering visage of a man I'd never met. "No," I shouted, focusing on the memory of our coffee breaks, the quiet companionship. "His name is Miller. He taught me the rules." "Rules can be rewritten," the narrator boomed as he stepped through the now-gone barrier, into the anechoic corridor, into my reality. The black foam on the walls began to droop and melt. "And what about your home? That little house on Elm Street? A cliché. Let's make it more interesting. You didn't grow up in a house. You grew up in a traveling circus. Your parents were acrobats who abandoned you in a dusty town in Oklahoma."
"No, 24 Maple Lane," I yelled, picturing the scuff marks on the kitchen floor, the chipped paint on my bedroom windowsill. I remember the smell of my mom's apple pie. He was in the observation hub with me now. The air crackled with his power. He was only feet away, his eyes burning into me. He was tearing my past apart, shredding the pages of my life, and my mind was the battlefield. I was losing ground. My anchors were failing. And then I realized he was attacking my memories, my story. But what about my feelings? Could he rewrite those? I stopped fighting his narrative attacks. I let them wash over me. The cruel mentor, the circus, the rewritten past. And I focused on the one thing he couldn't touch, the one thing that wasn't a story. I focused on the raw, unfiltered grief I felt for my mother. It was a searing, pure, and undeniable truth. It was a feeling, not a memory. It was a hole in the universe shaped exactly like her. "You can't have this," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You can't write this away. This hurts, and it's real." The narrator faltered. For the first time, a look of confusion crossed his face. "Grief is just the end of a story," he started. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It's not. It's the silence after the story is over, and it's mine." I pushed past the grief and found other feelings. The fierce loyalty I felt for Miller. The cold, hard dread that had been my companion for 7 years. The stubborn, stupid spark of hope that made me apply for this job in the first place. These weren't plot points. They were just human. They were chaotic and messy and real. I was no longer a character he could edit. I was a consciousness. I looked him in the eye. "You have no power here," I said. "This is my mind, my feelings, my reality. And you are just an idea, a bad idea. You are a story that is over." He staggered back as if I had physically struck him. The power in his eyes flickered. The melting walls began to re-solidify. The red light stopped flashing. The klaxon died, replaced by the familiar low hum of the restored containment field. The mechanical voice returned. "Containment field stable. System normal." The narrator looked at me, his face no longer filled with power, but with a sudden, horrifying emptiness. He had been disconnected. I had taken away his audience. I had closed the book. He didn't scream or fight. He just faded. His body became translucent, his features blurring, until he was just a shimmering outline, a ghost of a man. And then he was gone. Not dead, not escaped, just erased. A story that had been told and then forgotten. I stood there, alone, in the silence of the observation hub, my body shaking, my mind a war-torn landscape. But I was whole. I was still me. The vault door hissed open. Miller rushed in, his face a mask of fear and awe. He looked at me, then at the empty corridor where the most dangerous being in existence had just been standing. "Thorne, what did you do?" he whispered. I finally let my legs give out, slumping to the floor, exhausted to my very soul. I finished the story. I don't work at the Panopticon because I'm desperate for money anymore. I work here because I have to. The narrator is gone, but the threat remains. He was just one author. There are others. There are always others, scribbling in the margins of reality. The world doesn't know we exist. They don't know how fragile the boundary is between their mundane, predictable lives and the howling chaos that lies just a single thought away. They don't know that their belief in a solid, unchanging reality is the only thing that makes it so. Their collective story holds the world together. We are the guardians of that story. We are the janitors of the abyss. We are the librarians at the edge of the world. My job is to walk these silent white halls, to watch over the beings who have seen too much, and to ensure that their stories never become our reality. So when you go to sleep tonight, in your safe, normal bed, in your safe, normal house, take a moment,
Think about the rules of your world. The sun rises in the east. Gravity holds you to the floor. Yesterday happened. Cherish those rules. Because here, in the humming silence of the Nevada desert, we are fighting a war you'll never see to protect you from crimes you've never heard of. And we pray every single day that we are winning.